The Virginia Supreme Court stands in the way of Democrats' gerrymandering effort. They say it's not legal. We've got an update on where the midterm elections stand. Signal pollster Nick Weinstein tells us how this aggressive 2026 redistricting will affect the outcome of the midterms. We got a lot to break down. The jobs report is going to be a big discussion going forward. Welcome to the Sean Spicer Show. Let's get into it. All right, guys, I hope you had a great weekend. To all the mothers out there, I hope you had a great Mother's Day. But boy, was Friday a big day. And I'm going to tell you this right now. If you want to understand what Friday's Virginia Supreme Court ruling means and the impact that it will have on the 2020 elections, sit back, buckle up, because I'm going to give you analysis that you will not get anywhere else. The mainstream media is frankly stupid. I'm just going to tell you that right now. They don't actually know what they're talking about. I'm going to give you real numbers about the midterm. Nick Weinstein from Signal is here with us. He's going to give us the latest lay of the environment, what the polling says. But I'm going to tell you this right now. This was huge. What happened on Friday? The media has the midterms all wrong. Most of their so-called guests, these strategists, have never strategized with anybody, never mind been on a congressional race or anything else. So I'm just telling you, when you hear these pundits and strategists on CNN or elsewhere, no one ever actually tells you what they strategize with or with whom. They sort of register to vote and somehow CNN puts them on. I'm going to tell you because they are so dishonest when it comes to the impact of redistricting. And then they also will tell you that this gerrymandering is sort of some Republican plan. They don't talk about the disenfranchisement of political groups like Republicans in Massachusetts or Maryland who get completely screwed. Somehow this is only a one-way street for Republicans. It's unbelievable. On my local NBC station here in the Washington area, the reporter this morning said Republicans were upset because Democrats broke the rules. They didn't break the rules, folks. They broke the law. They violated the law. And it's not some like little infraction like you were playing a soccer game. This is for real. The Virginia Supreme Court on Friday struck down this Democrat attempt to violate the law in Virginia. They had taken what was then a 6-5 map in favor of Democrats, which, got to be honest, is probably the fairest thing I've ever seen when it comes to Democrats. I mean, they have a majority of the congressional delegation. That's probably where the state is right now. And they wanted to go 10-1. They wanted to take 5 congressional districts and start them in Fairfax County, Northern Virginia, and have them go down and weave like a little snake throughout the Commonwealth South, so that people in Southern Virginia were represented by a leftist liberal in Fairfax County. That's not representation. And like I said, in 4 distinct ways, it violated Virginia law. It was funny because when they first did this little plan, everybody on the left got excited. This is Hakeem Jeffries when it kicked off. Take a listen.
The law is with us in Virginia. The facts are with us in Virginia. And the people are with us in Virginia. There's no basis in law or fact for the Virginia Supreme Court, under the Constitution that exists, particularly in the aftermath of a people-approved referendum, to do anything other than to allow it to move forward.
I guess he was wrong because they didn't agree with him. And like I said, there were 4 distinct ways that they violated the Constitution and the law. 4 distinct ways. They couldn't even count to 90. That's what the law says it has to happen between the legislature approving it for a second time and the voters being, quote, presented it. That didn't occur. The Attorney General, Jay Jones, couldn't defend that because it wasn't true. He literally was dumbfounded when asked by CNN about this, and he couldn't answer the question. Secondly, it wasn't compact. That's what the Constitution of Virginia requires. Third, the language that they used was supposed to be in plain English that voters understood the impact. They, in quite opposite, did the exact opposite. They wrote the ballot measure and called it fair and temporary. That's an absolute lie and misleading voters. That was their goal, is to confuse people, to think somehow this was some temporary thing. Remember, voters in Virginia just a few years ago voted overwhelmingly 63% to take redistricting out of the hands of politicians. They didn't want to talk about that. And lastly, by the way, So you've got the number of days, you've got the language in the Constitution. But the other thing is that the law says that it has to happen in 2 sessions of the General Assembly. And then an intervening election has to occur. Well, last session, they were in a special session. They called a 1-day deal as before voters had actually, or while voters, millions of voters in Virginia had already started voting. So that was a clear another violation. Well, Hakeem Jeffries, who was so clear about that take on the ruling, had a much different tune this weekend. Take a listen.
A new generation of Americans have to show up, stand up, speak up, fight, get into good trouble to usher in an era of progress. We went from the progress of emancipation to the backlash of Jim Crow, the progress of the civil rights movement to the backlash of mass incarceration, the progress of electing Barack Obama to the backlash that has resulted in the elevation of Donald Trump, MAGA extremism, and this behavior that we're seeing coming out of the Supreme Court of the United States to throw the American South back into the Jim Crow era. So it's going to take an all-hands-on-deck effort.
Now, I don't even know what he's saying there. We're going back to Jim Crow. All this is out. I'm sorry, because you can't have black districts. Like, that's exactly the opposite of what you supposedly fight for. This is a problem of the Democratic Party, not the Republican Party. I've said this over and over again. Think about the black Republicans. Burgess Owens, John James, Wesley Hunt, Byron Donalds. They're not in majority black districts. They can win. But Democrats want to guarantee black Democrats a certain number of seats. Now, the thing that's so fascinating, and again, you will not hear this on anywhere else because they don't want, the media and the Democrats don't want you to know this. But Justice Arthur Kelsey, who wrote the decision in that Virginia case, was elected to the Virginia Supreme Court by the Virginia General Assembly in January of 15 by Democrats. You do realize this, right? So this guy gets nominated and passed through the General Assembly of Democrats. It wasn't Republicans. This is a Democratic judge. If they are pissed at anyone, be pissed at your own guy. This was unbelievable. He was put on the appellate bench by Democratic Governor Mark Warner and confirmed to the Supreme Court by every legislative Democrat in the Assembly at that time. The House of Delegates then, all of them, all the Democrats voted for him. It's unbelievable. And you know what their reaction now, by the way, is? They want to do 2 things. They're going to appeal to the Supreme Court. They have no basis for that, number 1. Number 2, and this is a kicker. This is literally the kicker, by the way. They are proposing, according to the New York Times, the Democrats in Virginia are saying that they want to impose a mandatory retirement age of Virginia Supreme Court justices at age 54. 54, that's an odd age, isn't it? How would you possibly come up with that? Oh, guess what? The youngest member of the current Virginia Supreme Court is 54. So they literally want to randomly pick the age at which the youngest member of the Virginia Supreme Court sits and throw them all out so they can appoint a new group who will rubber stamp what they want done. The hypocrisy of these Democrats knows no bounds. But I'm going to tell you why this matters to all of us. Okay. And this is the key thing. You will not hear this anywhere else, but I'm actually going to use facts and another thing, math, that you're not going to have anywhere else. These guys are all of the assumption prior to Friday that they'd win the House of Representatives. Republicans have ostensibly a 1-seat majority. They were very clear all of this was going to benefit them. That's why they did it. California, Virginia, etc. It was unbelievable. This is what I want you to read. This is what Hakeem Jeffries said. We will win the House in 2026 and then aggressively pursue decisive electoral campaign, finance, and judicial reform. Democrats will protect the right of African-American communities to elect their candidate of choice through litigation and intense mobilization. I'm sorry. If you're black and you want to run for Congress, run. If the Democratic Party wants to help you, help them. Nothing's stopping you. What are you going to do? I don't understand that. Judicial reform? Oh, again, that means packing the court. They don't want to say that. Campaign finance? What? You don't like how... The problem is when they don't get their way, this is the difference. They literally want to just change the rules. And you see the reaction out of Republicans right now because, according to the RNC spokesman, Ali Trujillo, Democrats are panicking because of decades of unconstitutional race-based gerrymandering and finally being exposed. As I've told you guys, this whole system benefited Democrats. That's it. They didn't care about anybody else. And right now, you've got the Congressional Black Caucus, the CBC, freaking out. They are facing an existential crisis. Think about how much power the Congressional Black Caucus has within the House of Representatives. They are a mountain. Everything has to get checked off by them. And the giant in that mountain, on that mountain, is Jim Clyburn of South Carolina. His district is about to go bye-bye. These guys were on the ascent. Remember, Clyburn's the guy who resurrected Joe Biden. And now he's in trouble because they're about to get rid of that Charleston-based South Carolina seat, potentially. This is a big deal. You've got potentially 19 of their entire caucus. That's about 1/3 that could get wiped out. This is going to be a big deal for the Democrats. Suddenly, the old guard is going to get ushered out and a bunch of new progressive left-wing nut jobs are going to get ushered in. This is a big deal for the caucus there on the Dem side. And I just want another fun fact. When these guys talk about the CBC, the Congressional Black Caucus, and how they represent blacks in the South and it's important and blah, 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 just remember, they've never allowed Republicans to join. They call themselves the Congressional Black Caucus, but they don't allow Republicans to join it. And this goes back decades. It's so funny how they talk about representation and importance of color and things like that. And yet when Republicans of color get elected, well, that doesn't count. We don't want them in our caucus. We don't care that they got elected in majority white districts because that's the thing. So as I said, the Virginia Democrats are going to appeal this to the Supreme Court. Remember, our attorney general here in Virginia is a guy named Jay Jones, the same guy who threatened his political opponent, wanted to kill him, and his kids. Well, apparently, aside from that small personality defect, he also isn't a great speller. And as one bad speller to another, I'm going to give you a piece of advice, Attorney General Jay Jones here in Virginia. Before you submit a brief to the Supreme Court, use spell check because you didn't spell Virginia right, you didn't spell senator right, and you can't even spell attorney right. You make a mockery of the job. Use spell check. I've done that, to help me with my problem spelling and in grammar. But this is an embarrassment. This is who these guys want. But let me just bottom line this for everybody. Why this matters. The momentum has suddenly shifted. In the last 10 days, Republicans went from being on their heels and being defensive to being on the offense and feeling the wind at their back. The Voting Rights Act being partially struck down at the Supreme Court has meant us talking about picking up seats in Louisiana and Alabama, potentially in South Carolina and Tennessee. I think we'll net 3 to 4 out of that. Florida, separate from the Voting Rights Act decision of the Supreme Court, will pick up 4. And now Virginia takes those 4 that were in the Dem column and puts them back in the Republican column. The Cook Political Report over the weekend moved 11 races from the Democrats towards the Republicans. 11. Now, here's my math. And again, I got to tell you this because this is crucial. You got to understand this because this is where the media won't tell you what's really going on. Sit down, focus for the next 2 minutes before I bring in Nick Weinstein to talk about the polling, though, because this is important. When you count up the seats in the House of Representatives and say which one are the Republicans favored to win, which ones are the Democrats, and where are the toss-ups? By my math, and again, there's a bunch of these guys that are out there. There's the Crystal Ball, there's the Cook Political Report, there's the Inside Elections. I've got us right now, and I'll give you the things. The Crystal Ball has us Republicans at 211, Democrats at 208, toss-up at 16. Inside Elections has Republicans at 217, Democrats at 207, and 11 toss-ups. The Cook Political Report has Republicans at 209, Democrats at 208, toss-up at 218. Why does this matter? Well, look at the math. You need 218 to get to the majority. And under the lowest scenario, which is the Cook Political Report, Republicans have 209. You take inside elections, they're at 217. Republicans under that scenario need just one seat of the toss-ups to get the majority. The media keeps saying that Democrats are favored. Yes, I'll give you that. The political headwinds are difficult. The environment favors them. There's no question about it. But you still have to run the races, folks. You actually have to go through the motions. And here's the reality. Worst case scenario, Republicans need 9 seats. 9. That's it. Best case scenario, they need 1 if you look at the inside elections. Under the Sabato, they need 7. The crystal ball. The point is, for all these folks, the Democrats would have to run the table to take back the House. That's just not reality. And I'm just telling you because the media isn't going to share this anywhere else with you. That's the key thing. Now, I want to bring in Nick Weinstein of Signal Polling. These guys have been excellent to find out what the political landscape is and where those headwinds are blowing. Before I get to that, though, I got to tell you, we've got a great week. Tricks on the Right are coming up with us tomorrow. Brandon Gill, congressman from Texas, who's a master when it comes to these congressional hearings, he's going to join us on Wednesday, and we've got a great panel coming your way on Thursday. By the way, there are still tickets available. Thanks for all the support to make Trump 2.0 a New York Times bestseller. We've updated the copy if you go out there and look at it at Amazon. And then Friday night, if you're in the D.C. area, you're more than welcome to come to our free event at the Trump Kennedy Center. It's going to be the last event. You just go to SeanSpicer.com. You'll see the little banner at the top. Click on Trump 2.0 and it guides you right to those tickets that you can get for the Trump Kennedy Center this Friday night. I'm so excited to have this discussion. Larry O'Connor, my buddy from Town Hall, will be there to engage in conversation with me, and then we'll take your questions. But before I bring in Nick, I got to tell you something really interesting. If you're working on infrastructure, industrial sites, or even pedestrian bridges, there is a material that you might not be thinking about, but it should be. There's a product and that I've never, ever gotten to know well. It's called fiberglass reinforced polymer, or FRP. It's derived from a company called Bedford Reinforced Plastics. It's strong, it's lightweight, it's built to handle harsh environments. You know what I'm talking about? Like you'll see this sometimes, a derivation of this on like decks or stuff, but it doesn't rust, it corrodes or break down. It means less maintenance, longer lifespan, fewer headaches down the road. You're seeing it more and more at like big projects like wastewater facilities, utility, and even architectural applications where durability and longevity really count. So instead of using products that are going to wear out real quick and then taxpayers have to refinance and refund them. No way. It's right here, made in America. Bedford FRP is already being used in everything from safety structures to grading pedestrian bridges and even light vehicle bridges across the country. It's so cool to check this stuff out. If you want to see how it works and why this whole thing is working out, check it out at bedfordreinforced.com/Spicer. So it's Bedford, BERFORD, reinforce.com/Spicer. Check out this stuff because we should be using more of products like this. Save us a lot more down the road than a lot of the assets that we're using to build some of these public infrastructure sites. By the way, though, I got to tell you, especially as it gets hotter at night and spring and summer kick in, I'm telling you, it gets hotter at night, and one of the things that I love is as I get into bed, it's nice being cool and refreshing and relaxing. I'm telling you, if you've had old sheets, you know what I'm talking about. When it gets hot, you wake up in the middle of the night, everything's stuck to you. I got a big solution for you. My Ball and Branch sheets make going to bed so nice. You guys hear me talk about going to sleep all the time and how critical it is to wellness. Ball and Branch sheets are the best investment that you can make. They have organic cotton that is woven for airflow, not just softness. Unlike synthetic cooling fabrics that are treated with chemicals, this cooling is structural. When I slide into my Ball and Branch sheets, it feels like light and crisp. I feel like I'm literally staying at one of those nice, really nice hotels, you know, that you only spend when you're on someone else's dime or like at a really nice wedding or something. I love these Boll and Branch sheets. I've got the blanket as well. Boll and Branch sheets are an absolute game changer. So get ready to sleep cooler this summer with Boll and Branch. Get 15% off your first order plus free shipping. You've got to enter the URL exactly like this, bowlandbranch.com/Spicer and use code Spicer. That's Bowl and Branch, BOLLAND branch.com/Spicer and use code Spicer to unlock 15% off. Some exclusions do apply. Without further ado, I want to bring in our great guest, Nick Weinstein, the principal and pollster at Signal Polling and Analytics. Nick, good to see you again. A big Friday for those of us. I can see from the smile on your face, you agree with me. Talk about the impact that this redistricting had on the prospects of Republicans holding the House.
Well, obviously, it's huge, right? We're talking about the difference between a 9-1 map to a potential 6-5 map. And I mean, it's a win for democracy too, right? Because the Democrats forced this redistricting across the finish line in a way that I think everybody who was an impartial observer knew was at best, really, really questionable, at worst, as the Virginia Supreme Court has ruled, not legal. So now, Virginians are going to vote on fair maps. And I think ultimately there's a couple seats that are going to be pretty tough in this political climate for Republicans to hold. But the reality is that the outlook for Republicans keeping control of the House looks a heck of a lot better after the Virginia Supreme Court ruling, especially as these other states in the South now, spurred by the audacious, Democratic decision to try to do this. And with the Calais decision, the Supreme Court ordering them to redistrict to eliminate these, racially gerrymandered districts. The outlook's a lot better than it was the last time we were together. That's for sure.
Yeah. The thing that's interesting to me is that if you hear the Democrats, they, especially the Black Democrats, they seem to believe that voters will, revolt against this. I've never seen in my 30 years that someone really cared about redistricting as an issue. It seems like inside baseball. Is this something that you expect or have seen show up in any kind of surveys?
No, I mean, this is inside baseball. I mean, obviously voters that are, left leaning and aggressively anti-Trump, this is just another arrow in the quiver for those folks to motivate them, but they're already angry about 1,000 other things, and they'll find 1,000 more things to be angry about between now and November. But I think this is a non-factor politically. I think the only place where we see this showing up is actually, ironically, in Republican primary elections. And if you look at the results in Indiana, a place where, President Trump intervened because their legislature refused to go after, take a look at redistricting. They paid the consequence there. But as a general election issue, it's still the economy.
Okay. One of the things before we move on to like Iran and the economy is Hakeem Jeffries and some of the CBC, the Congressional Black Caucus members, have really talked about how they're going to go out there and fight this. Do you think that Black voters might be motivated to go out and vote in the midterms in a way that they wouldn't have prior to these decisions?
I just find that somewhat hard to believe, right? I think if you're an average American, Black, white, or Hispanic, you're waking up every day worried about, putting food on the table, putting gas in your car, not, the ethnicity of the person that represents you in Congress. And I think, what is most telling to me is that these debates over, these historically majority minority districts, I mean, the debate that we're having in Tennessee, the representative isn't even African-American. It's just happens to be a Democrat. So this is like an internal, I think, party issue for folks that are in the activist class on both the right and the left. But I don't think your average Black voter is waking up in the morning saying, man, I wish my representative were Black. I think they're waking up and they're saying, I wish Washington would do something to make things a little bit easier for me to put food on the table.
I do think it's worth noting, you mentioned that Tennessee-Memphis district, right? A guy named Steve Cohen, who's as white as you can get, represents a district that was drawn for Blacks.
Yeah. Well, in the first race, the first statewide race that I ever ran was Daniel Cameron's race for Attorney General in Kentucky, the first elected African-American statewide in the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and we were winning in that Republican primary, counties where I guarantee you not a single black voter cast a ballot in the Republican primary. And that's the beauty of America, right? And, you look at a state like South Carolina, where there's been all this hyperbole that, if we redistrict the congressional maps, it'll be another 100 years before a black member of Congress comes out of South Carolina. But they forget that Tim Scott is a sitting United States senator that represents the entire state of South Carolina. We're in a post-racial society right now, and it's the Democrats that are kicking and screaming to try to take us back to the age of Jim Crow and segregation.
By the way, there is something to a bit of irony about this Tennessee issue, right? Which is that Steve Cohen is a white Democrat representing the area, and he may lose his seat, and he might be replaced by a black Republican.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, the irony of that could not have been crazier.
Yeah, and I think over the years, 5 times black Republicans have run against Steve Cohen and have lost, because this isn't about race. It's about the partisanship of Steve Cohen.
Well, and also, if it's a majority-minority district, I know he's the outlier, but it is interesting that no one seems to complain that he represents that.
Right, yeah.
Or that you might get an issue like, as I mentioned, suddenly having a black Republican doesn't count as well. And I noted this earlier. I mean, it's funny how much they care about this until a black Republican does well. The CBC doesn't seem to acknowledge that in any way, shape, or form.
Right. Yeah, 100%.
All right, let's move on to Iran real quick. The president heading to China this week. And I think obviously Iran's going to be top of mind. China gets a lot of its fuel from there. What impact is Iran writ large? Because the other thing is, again, not to throw in another issue here, but like the president seems to have gotten really pissed about Iran's latest deal. I got to think that bombing is back on the agenda. What is the current state of how Iran is impacting voter views, attitudes, and potentially the 2026 election?
Well, it comes back to the economy, right? And the problem with Iran isn't that we're in Iran or that we're confronting Iran. Iran is still deeply unpopular with the American people. And I think people recognize that the regime is a net negative to international security. The problem is that the price at the pumps and the price of goods and services have only gone up even more than they were before because of the downstream, economic impacts of what's happening in the Gulf. And that's the real, I think, challenge for President Trump is that, Americans are looking at Republicans and they're looking at Trump and they're saying, hey, like, we need an off-ramp here. We need some relief at the grocery store. We need some relief at the gas pumps. But the danger if President Trump makes a deal with Iran is that if he leaves them the loaded gun of, we can re-seize control of the Strait of Hormuz at any time, that puts all the power with the Iranian regime to, as we get closer to the election or at the next election season to start to, make noise about, closing the strait and then suddenly sending prices skyrocketing again. And I think that's kind of the tough position that he's in right now is the American people desperately want relief on the economy, but he's not really able to give it to them without giving the Iranian regime a loaded gun.
So let's dive deep into that for a second. Chris Wright who's the energy secretary, was asked about this on a bunch of the Sunday shows yesterday. If, for example, the president suspended the national gas tax, and I'm not necessarily in favor of this because it'd be hard to put it back on, but if he could do something like that would drop the price of the pump like that right away, right? So there's an export ban that he could put in place. But from a polling perspective, a purely political partisan, would that be a good political move for him to do something that at least got the price down? Yeah,
look, I think to an extent too, we've got to remember, this is not election season right now, right? So I almost want to have us be thinking forward to where gas price is going to be when the majority of voters start to go to vote in the fall, right? But yeah, I think if President Trump can go to voters and can say to voters as they're making up their mind for the midterms, hey, look, gas prices are not as bad as they were over the summer. They're now similar to where they were before the Iran conflict started. That's obviously going to help make the economic case. But I think we've just got to be laser focused that voters are making their decision in November. They're not making it now. So let's not pull out all the stops now.
Okay. Let's break that down just a second, because I've argued that, when you go into the summer, like these decisions are like bake slowly in, right?
Yeah,
So
sure.
you might cast your ballot, let's call it October, November, because
Yep.
okay,
Yep.
more and more people are voting earlier than November. But
Absolutely.
you make up your mind probably earlier than that. And in your, as a pollster, if you're advising these candidates, hey, this is when you really need to focus your ads, your message, whatever. What's that sweet spot? Is it August? Is it the beginning of September? Is it as late September? Like you just mentioned, you'd rather wait. So what is that sweet spot in your mind that a candidate should say, this is when I want the prices to be lowest. This is when I want my message to get out there?
I think it just varies so much state by state because every state's voting differently now. And, in some states, early voting, I mean, we look at Virginia, 45 days of early voting is what ultimately derailed their whole redistricting. So it depends a little bit. And look, every single thing that Republicans in Congress should be doing between now and November is focusing on affordability, focusing on bringing down the cost of goods and services. I would say they should work on that all the way through the summer and into the fall. But if there's, maybe a sugar rush where we're going to, flip the switch and suddenly we can drop, the gas tax, but there's a chance that in the longer term, those prices are going to continue to climb. I wouldn't want to be flipping any switches until, around Labor Day or after Labor Day. If there's a, one time, one shot, this is going to drive prices down, but it's not going to be super sustainable. I would wait until after Labor Day.
Okay, so because that's what I've always found to be the interesting. I get that there's a little bit of a band there, a spectrum of when, but I think somewhere around that time is got to be key, right? So they're done with maybe a summer vacation, but is there enough time for that to bake in? I remember I always tell people in 1992, George H.W. Bush was right that the economy was getting better, but people hadn't felt it yet. So there's a difference. I mean, you referenced the flipping the switch. So if you could drop gas prices real quick, 50%, right? Don't you need a little bit more time for that to bake into people's psyche?
I think you may. I also think that the average voter that's still undecided about what party they're supporting even now is a voter that tunes into politics very, very late in the cycle. And I also think gas prices are just a little bit different than a lot of other economic indicators in the sense that, the average thing that's actually causing financial pressure for voters, ironically, isn't gas prices. They spend a lot more money at the grocery store every week. Wages, housing, healthcare costs are all way bigger financial stressors on the average American family than gas prices, but they see the gas prices every single day when they drive down Main Street because they're prominently posted outside of every gas station, right? So I think if there was an economic indicator where you could flip a switch and it would resonate almost immediately and people would start to pick up on it, gas prices would be the place because it's the only place where your average American is seeing the price of a commodity every single day, day in and day out, right?
I agree with you. I mean, I joke with people all the time. I've got 2 gas stations at the top of my street, and I literally will keep an eye on how they're doing, which one's cheaper. But that kind of answers my next question, I think, which is if the administration had one thing to focus on, that they could really put all their effort into getting something down to address this affordability issue. In your opinion, is it gas prices or would it be like food and commodities or something like that?
Well, the number one stressor that we see in our surveys when we ask people about, economic stress is at the grocery store. It's food and food prices. And now I think if you ask economists, they would say that's downstream of gas prices and that higher gas prices means higher cost for, agriculture to go out there and to harvest this stuff in the field. And the cost to transport it, to the grocery store is a major driver of that food cost. But people are telling us that prices at the grocery store are a major point of concern. So I would say, look at the grocery store, look at gas prices, and then we need to just find a way to be better about talking about economic issues as Republicans. I think the 2 takeaways from President Trump's one big beautiful bill that really resonated with folks was the no taxes on tips and taxes on overtime, because people recognize, well, I am in a tipped wage job and now I'm not being taxed on it. I work a lot of overtime. I'm not being taxed on it. But, marginal changes to people's tax rate, that's really, really hard for really plugged in people like myself to understand what the economic impact is to my, budget until I start doing my taxes at the end of the year, let alone the average voter. So making individual economic arguments about how President Trump's policies are, putting more money in the pockets of average voters is the game between now and November.
So I kind of am intrigued by this because I think that you're right, that there's a lot of things that they've done, i.e. those two things that you just mentioned specifically, the no tax on tips and no tax on overtime. Then you've got no tax on Social Security, the American car, right? But is it your opinion that some of this is just pure messaging, that they're not spending enough time hammering it home? Because I feel like the policies are there. It's just that we're not maybe selling them enough or advertising them enough.
Yeah, I think that's 100% right. And we even saw this with some of the other tax reform bills that Republicans have pushed in the past. And, we got to tax season and people were saying, well, my return is smaller than it was the year before, but it's because we've withheld less money from your paycheck and you were taxed less over the course of the year. So I think we've just got to recognize as communicators that the average person is not as economically sophisticated as maybe, us policymakers are. And I certainly don't consider myself economically sophisticated at all. And I couldn't tell you, how different the amount of federal taxes I paid last year was compared to the years before, because, your wages change and economic conditions change. So we've got to do a much better job as Republicans if we're going to do something, big like tax reform, of explaining to people, what does this actually mean for you? Because the average voter is not going to give us credit at the end of the year. They're going to say, oh, well, my tax return seems smaller, but maybe I have about the same amount of money in my bank account as I had before, but things are more expensive, and they kind of shrug their shoulders. And, Republicans and President Trump don't get any of the credit, whereas Democrats are really good. If they're going to give you an economic benefit, they're going to cut you a check and send it to you in the mail, and you're going to get that check signed by, Democratic administration, and that the average voter is going to recognize, well, that was money that I got from the government. Whereas, we could cut your taxes by 50%. And for a lot of people, they just kind of shrug their shoulders and say, oh, okay.
I know the DoorDash stunt that the president did the other day with that woman bringing the McDonald's kind of got some ridicule, but I actually liked it. I thought that it was bringing home this notion of people who are actually benefiting from the policies. Do you think that's kind of the thing that we need to do more of? Is that what we're talking about here?
Yeah, I think it's getting people like that woman from DoorDash, getting folks that are regular, everyday Americans working in this economy to be the third party, advocates of how the policy is helping them. Because let's be honest, I mean, President Trump's approval ratings are pretty consistent. There's a segment of people that no matter what President Trump says on any given day, could be sky is blue, they're going to stomp their feet and disagree with him. And in general, just people are really, I think dissatisfied with Washington, D.C. They don't put a lot of trust in the Republicans. They don't put a lot of trust in the Democrats either. But the one place where there is sort of still trust in institutions is on Main Street and small businesses and, folks that live in the community. Your everyday average American worker is the best advocate for these policies, because a lot of people feel like they've been burned by Washington, have been burned by, big business, have been burned by both parties in the past, and they just kind of tune everything out. So finding voters and finding institutions that have trust and making them the centerpiece of this debate is great politics and great policy.
Is there a demographic, Nick, that we need to really worry about? We hear about young men who are becoming disenfranchised or disengaged, or whatever the dis word is. We hear about Black men, Hispanics, folks that were part of the winning 2024 coalition that might be attriting, or is it not so much that they're really that big of a deal in a midterm election?
I think there's a little bit of both, right? The midterm coalition for Republicans has just changed a lot since President Trump has kind of taken over as the leader of the party. The Republican Party used to be the party of like high turnout, high political engagement voters. And that's kind of changed. And we're now a big segment of the, Trump Republican electorate is far less politically engaged and far less likely to vote in the midterm than, maybe the Republican Party of 2010, 2012, and certainly before that. So I'm concerned about low information, like low political engagement voters across the demographic spectrum. They tend to be younger. As our voters get older, they seem to get more politically engaged. But the other thing that concerns me, and it's not so much a demographic issue, it's an information flow issue. And where are these voters getting their news from? And it's overwhelmingly from social media. I think it was voters under 25 or voters under 35 in our most recent National Voter Trends survey. 44% of them, one of their primary sources of news was TikTok. And look, there's just not a lot of conservative voices on TikTok. There's not a lot of Republican influencers that are communicating day in and day out with young people. And I think that was like one of the big strengths of the most recent Trump presidential campaign is he found a way to get folks that were maybe not political, but were in that space in talking to those voters, was able to get them to become advocates for the campaign. And they delivered a message to a segment of voters that otherwise aren't seeing political news.
So is that an issue that they need to do more, double down on, like going on Theo Vaughn and the Nelk Boys and stuff? Like, in other words, go to where they are, or is there an issue that we need to juice? Like, so is it, hey, we need to find something that get young voters or the base guys? Like, I think Save America is a big one with the base, right? But is it something we need to do to juice them, or is it that we need to meet them where they're at, or both?
I think it's a combination of both, right? Like, I think it would be great. And I am sure that we will see a big push for Republicans to try to go on these programs with these established voices and to be communicating in those mediums. But I also think, a lot of news now is being consumed in these short, 15 and 6-second clips. And I just, and this is not necessarily just a Republican Party problem, but we don't have a lot of communicators in the Republican Party that are really comfortable communicating with voters in like TikTok or on Instagram in these 6-second and 15-second, blurbs. And I think redoubling our efforts, certainly, at a place like the RNC and with the National Party more globally, to say like, hey, how do we find voices in the Republican Party that are comfortable communicating that way? Because look, we're not going to go to the Senate and put Mitch McConnell, in 6-second short form videos and have any kind of success there. But how do we find a way to recalibrate our communications to recognize the fact that, our politicians every day go on Fox News, every day go on these cable news outlets and do these long form interviews. And that's great for the segment of people that watch it. But, the next generation of voters, they're not seeing any of that. And it's not really translating. And there's an echo chamber that's being dominated by left of center voices and, an algorithm that's, got some thumbs on the scale too. So
I listen, I'm with you. I've been preaching this for a while, which is they've got to stop going to just legacy outlets. The average viewer that watches cable news is close to 70.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just not where the future is, right? Two more quick questions for you. A report came out Friday, aside from the Virginia ruling, that crime, this is according to Axios, crime falls almost everywhere. Baltimore County, Maryland, down 83%. Suffolk County, New York, down 72%. Omaha, Nebraska, down 71%. Aurora, Colorado, 67% down. Newark, New Jersey, 66% down. Washington, D.C., 64.7%. Is this an issue that's worth talking about, or is it just, hey, you're already in a blue area anyway, you're not going to get any credit, don't bother?
No, look, I think this is a critical part of building the Republican coalition going forward, especially as cities like New York, embrace, a Mamdani that, I think policies are going to, have a really negative effect on the NYPD's ability to fight crime. And other cities like, Washington, D.C. has a competitive mayoral election going on right now between a candidate that I think styles themselves as sort of Mamdani light and a more, establishment Democratic candidate. So Republicans have to stake out this position as the trusted party of adults on crime. And we've got to continue to beat that drum and celebrate the successes. Unfortunately, because crime is down so much, sort of similar to immigration, we're a little bit of a victim of our own success here. This isn't the issue that's top of mind for voters, but we've got to beat the drum. And where we can show that the Democrats are out of touch with like common sense policies, like if you're a violent criminal and you commit another violent crime, you should be held in jail before your trial. Basic common sense stuff like that stuff still resonates. And if Republicans can position themselves as the party of common sense, they're going to make further inroads in, urban communities and suburban communities.
Okay. Last, yes or no, do you think that we should be doing a lot more to find out about UFOs and alien life?
Sure. Yes. Look, I think we see this in our polling all the time. People are more conspiratorial than ever. I think the problem with the UFO debate is we could put out all the UFO documents tomorrow and people wouldn't believe that those were all UFO documents, right? So we're in a no-win situation here. Unless someone can, produce someone out of Area 51 for us, I think people are going to still have questions. So
I like that idea. Nick Weinstein from Signal Polling, thanks for being with us. I'm going to follow up on that.
Thanks, Sean. See ya.
All right, that was a great conversation with Nick. I got to tell you, one other thing that I want to share with you before we leave. It gave me a chuckle over the weekend. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was in a conversation with David Axelrod, the former Obama advisor, and she was asked about whether or not some of these suggestions that she considered running for the Senate or the presidency are top of mind to her, because the Washington Post had criticized her for some of her positions, saying if for someone who wants to advance up the ranks, these are not the positions that one takes, especially when it talks to critiquing billionaires. And this is how she responded. Take a listen.
You know, it's funny because in this op-ed that Jeff Bezos paid for in the Washington Post, there was this line that you had mentioned earlier about, well, as a potential 2028 contender, XYZ. And in the context of that, it was very clear this was a veiled threat, right? So it was the elite saying, if you want this job, you just stepped out of line. And we want you to know where the real power is. And it's in the modern day barons who own the Post and own the algorithms, and we'll make an example out of you. And what's funny about that is that they assume that my ambition is positional. They assume that my ambition is a title or a seat. And my ambition is way bigger than that. My ambition is to change this country.
All right, there you go. My ambition is way bigger than that. I'm going to change the country. I mean, I got to tell you, I laugh when I hear this. She is so cocky. My ambition is bigger than this. I don't just want to be president. I want to be like czar and ruler. It's egotistical. It's kind of stupid too, because it's also like, how are you going to make change if you're not in one of those positions? Remember, she'd be still in her 30s if she ran for president. But this just tells you the chutzpah of a woman like this. I know we should tap into all that experience she has as a bartender. I think it's smart. Anyway, I appreciate her sharing that with us, because that's our moment of Zen as we head into this week. President's going to be going to China. We'll talk a lot about that going forward. We've got a big week on tap, as I mentioned. A lot about what that trip means, what the deliverables are. And as I mentioned, if you're interested in coming to Washington, D.C. to attend the Trump Kennedy Center event on Friday to celebrate the discussion of Trump 2.0, my brand new New York Times bestseller, go to SeanSpicer.com. Those tickets are there. I appreciate you being with us. Thanks for everything. We'll see you back here tomorrow on the Sean Spicer Show. Well, if you enjoyed this content, make sure to like this video, subscribe, and click the notification bell to get more.